Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston and we're recording on a Friday afternoon. And now I must insert a quick message at the start of this podcast. I apologise to the listeners if my audio was really bad earlier in the week, because on reflection with the producer, we'll look back at it and it just wasn't good enough. So we've amended the issue. It was a software problem. We've tweaked it, looked at it, and hopefully I'm coming across the airwaves nice and clear today. Samuel, it won't make a difference to you because you can hear us anyways. But how are you? You all right?
I can. I'm not too bad, thank you. Not too bad at all.
You've been any luck on Royal Ascot this week? I'm sure you've been betting on every single race, have you?
No. My attention's been more fixated on the Ashes and Wimbledon's just around the corner as well. So it's always good to have some real genuine sports events that are non-football in the summer. It doesn't make much of a difference to us in terms of ticking the summer along, because the summers always seem to shorter between the seasons, but you want to watch some high quality sport in the meantime, and it is nice to have that escapism with the Ashes, as I said, and the tennis coming round, and also a bit of golf as well.
Nice to hear that you like inferior sports, Samuel. It's football, horse racing, and golf. That's the pecking order.
It's always been football and cricket for me, but when Wimbledon's on, I think it's helped us growing up in this country that the Wimbledon's always been on free to air TV. Well, you have to pay the license fee, of course, but it's a small price to pay in the grand scheme of things. Although I suspect I'm not speaking on everyone's behalf on that one.
Yeah, I do enjoy Wimbledon. I'm slagging it off a bit there, but I do enjoy it. It's a great spectacle. Anyway, Samuel, we'll make it snappy. Both busy men today. I've got a place to go. Going to go see Gary Neville at my old university later, doing a talk, and you're of course busy yourself. So we'll just jump into the biggest point from this week, I guess, which was Mason Mount. He was the big talking point. Obviously, United have had an interest in him and they've submitted a second offer this week for £45 million up front with £5 million in add-ons, should I say. That's obviously been rejected by Chelsea. What's the latest on that deal, really? Because to me, he feels very attainable at this point, and he does feel like he's going to be the first signing of the summer at Old Trafford.
There will be a third bid, and it's probably a matter of time until Chelsea decide whether that's acceptable or not. It would be odd if for United to go this far down the road and then decide to turn around at any point. If they don't sign Mount, you'd have to see that as a failure. Now, personal terms were agreed. I can't remember when I did that story. Was it 3 weeks ago, maybe? I was told at the time that personal team terms were agreed. No club-to-club agreement. These things can drag out. It's in everyone's interest to get that deal done quite quickly. Chelsea need some sales before the end of the month to balance the books, given the amount of incomings they've had in recent transfer windows, and it's the end of I think it's the second quarter or the third quarter. I'm not a financial expert by any stretch, but there's a quarter that ends June 30th, and that's only a week off now. United are bidding quite precisely with Mount as well. They're not just chucking money at him because they are on a tight budget, as they have been in probably more summers than people would actually realise. And where the prices always go up, of course, it means that there are fewer players you can buy with the money that you have at your disposal, especially if you're United. And go back 2 years ago, they budgeted for two big signings that summer in Varane and Sancho. They got them done, quite commendably given United standards. I think Sancho was 72.9 million. That was the overall fee. With Varane, it was rising to something like 42 million pounds. With Mount, if they sign him for 55 or 60 million, there will be money left there to sign a striker. But of course, when it comes to signing that striker, there will be a lot of negotiations that go on there in terms of what's the upfront fee. What are the add-ons? How will the add-ons be paid? How will they be triggered? Are the add-ons likely? Are they probable? I think you've seen that with the Declan Rice negotiations that Arsenal started with. They tried to chance their arm, suggesting that they could. West Ham would get money for Declan Rice if Arsenal won the Premier League or if they won the Champions League. And of course, Arsenal haven't won the Premier League in nearly 20 years, and they've never won the Champions League. So clubs are going to chance their arm, as I said, and with United, the important thing is that the player wants to come. He has to leave Chelsea this summer because he's not going to sign a new contract. There's an acceptance at Chelsea that he will go, that he has to go, and it's just the waiting game. And where, with social media in particular, where every cough and spit and everything is covered in sometimes excruciating detail, it gives the impression that some of these things are sagas when they're not. United are still hopeful that they can get that done, get that deal concluded swiftly. So I'm always loath to put in time frames on these things, because I think that's I just think that's probably unwise, and that there have been a couple of examples, not necessarily that have been related to the MEN's coverage of signings or possible signs in the past, but you see it happen so often, and more often than not, people end up with egg on their face. But if you were a betting man, and I know you certainly are, I think the odds on Mount still ending up at United would be pretty slim.
Although I've not done very well at Royal Ascot, Samuel, this week, so maybe I shouldn't be. But there's still 2 days remaining, Friday and Saturday, as we're recording this podcast. I think 50 million is probably the sweet spot with add-ons. I know it's kind of pointless getting really into the detail of what price it is. But I mean, when you look at Raheem Sterling, who was signed from Manchester City for 47 million, he had 1 year left on his deal, of course, just like Mount does. And Arsenal are believed to be closing in on Kai Havertz as well for 65 million, and he's got 2 years left on his deal. So when you have that as context, I think 50 million is a very fair reflection of market value for Mount, really. And I guess it's good that United aren't looking to overpay. They're saying, look, this is what we're going to offer, and if you really want more, we're going to walk away from this deal. And sometimes in the past, we haven't saw that. So that's obviously very promising. Why do you think Ten Hag wants him then, Samuel, particularly? And I guess simply for me, he's going to bring a lot of energy to that midfield. We've saw the midfield lacking legs in the latter stage of the season. Christian Eriksen we discussed quite a bit. And I pulled up a stat with Rich. He made 13 starts in the Premier League in 2023. And he only played a full game once in that run, which was against Arsenal at the Emirates. So that just shows you, he just keeps getting
and that was needs must,
he?
Really, wasn't it? Because Casemiro was suspended that day.
Yeah, and he's just looked tired, hasn't he, Eriksen? He's looked short of pace, and he can't press how Ten Hag wants him across a full 90 minutes. So I guess Mount's going to really improve that midfield in that regard.
Couldn't agree more with you there. And it was interesting reading Ty's piece on, was it Thursday morning, about Mount's year in his gap year, if you like, in the Netherlands, where he would have been playing games in front of Ten Hag, and someone likened him to Frenkie de Jong. And of course, Ten Hag spent almost the entirety of last summer hoping to reunite with de Jong. That always seemed pretty remote, the chance of United going back in for de Jong this summer, even though Ten Hag has always been open to it, as you'd expect him to be. So in a way, you look at who is attainable and who is slightly similar to de Jong. I wouldn't necessarily have thought of Mason Mount, because I think certainly for those of us who've watched him quite regularly play for Chelsea, he's played higher up the pitch, and that was his role in the England team as well when they got to the Euros final in 2021. And it would still be interesting to see what happens there, if provided they, of course, do end up signing Mount, because Fernandes had some really good games last season playing deeper, and you wonder, it's probably a long shot, but you still wonder whether Ten Hag's thinking, well, I'll play Mount for higher up and I'll bring Fernandes deeper. But the gut feeling is that Mount will be coming in to take Eriksen's place in that team, and then you've got a very good creative player to call upon from the bench, and you can rotate as well. There is some symmetry between those two players, and that's what United need, really. They need players in two positions who are quite identical, because the problem they had with Eriksen in games last season was that he would come off in the second half, and it would completely compromise their fluidity. The way they played with Eriksen was completely different to the way they played without Eriksen. It was like night and day. Tottenham away feels like a good example of that. I know United were starting to lose authority or control of that game, and Spurs had scored, but it was Eriksen who fashioned the chance for Fernandes at 2-1, and he smacked it against the crossbar when he should have scored. Then Eriksen went off, and you could tell United supporters weren't entirely in agreement with that decision.
Was that the soccer?
It happened so often last season. That might have been. I think the infamous one for that was Sevilla in the home leg when you had Malacia, Weghorst and Langer all come on with United 2-0 up, and they eventually lost 5-2 on aggregate in that tie. So that was, in terms of, like, there were very few disaster classes from Ten Hag, but that was the one that really springs to mind. But certainly with Eriksen, it was becoming problematic, and you did watch him in games, and I think it was it Brighton they played on the Thursday last month at the start of May, and then they had West Ham on the Thursday, and he didn't start at Brighton. That was seen as a surprise, and they certainly missed him. But you also knew Ten Hag thought, well, I need him more for West Ham on the Sunday, so I'll start him in that game. And when you're in that pattern, and it is a taxing season, and fortunately United will not have that dreaded Thursday-Sunday schedule next season, but you would still hope to have players who have the durability to get through what was a pretty onerous season. I mean, they had a hell of a lot of games. Was it 61 or 62 games? And some of them were genuinely avoidable. You think about the Europa League playoff, they should have won that group. They didn't. So they ended up with a two-legged tie against Barcelona, engrossing though it was. It was 2 extra games, and you did wonder at the time whether that might affect their preparation for the League Cup final. In the end, it didn't, and they actually handled that February extremely well when they had 8 or 9 games. It was a hell of a month, but United didn't lose a single game that month. But there was definitely a levelling off with the performance level after that. And of course, a week after Wembley, they were trounced 7-0 at Liverpool. So, I mean, and what you said at the start, the point about Sterling's fee last year, 47 million for a player with the year left in his contract. I think the more interesting point observation you just touched upon was Kai Havertz, and I didn't realise that he has 2 years left in his contract. So if he's going for this reputed fee of 65 million, that probably strengthens United's bargaining position as to what Mount's valuation is. Because although I'd argue Mount is a better player than Havertz, similar age range, similar pedigree, won similar honours as well, there can't be a great disparity in terms of those two players' valuations. And of course, Mount wants to leave.
Exactly. You're right, though, it has been a very long season. I'm off to Portugal tomorrow, and Samuel, I need a holiday. So if I need a holiday, I can only imagine what the players have needed, and they're the ones actually doing the running around. I've just been sitting on my laptop and typing away, really. I guess it's ironic, Mount's on the move, his best friend's also on the move, Samuel, or seems to be anyways. Declan Rice, West Ham have confirmed he will be leaving this summer. Arsenal are obviously in talks, but for the last few days there's been really momentum behind Man City and Rice, and they've obviously got an interest in him as well. I guess the ship sailed as far as United's interest in Rice is concerned anyways.
Yeah, the thing with Rice is that his name is still being bracketed with United's, and it does feel like that's West Ham's way of trying to get Arsenal to get their act together to cough up the money. City and United are never going to have an issue with being linked with Declan Rice, because he's a brilliant player, and he's a player that in other circumstances they would be absolutely making a beeline for, and they'd have had the framework in place to sign him months in advance. But these things change. For a while it felt like Rice was inevitably going to end up playing for Chelsea with his mate Mount. They came through the same youth team, I think, at Chelsea. Rice was let go and has done tremendously well at West Ham. He's had a brilliant West Ham career as well, and is clearly going to leave on good terms there, given that his send-off was their first major trophy in, 43 years with the Conference League. And really with United, in hindsight, and it was certainly being talked about at the time in the summer of 21, that the need for a defensive midfielder. And I'd written earlier in the year that Rice had spoken to Harry Maguire and Luke Shaw about United. He was clearly intrigued by them, and it was interesting those quotes he gave to TalkSport after playing against United last month, how United are the biggest club in the world, and you want to impress against them, and that was tantamount to fluttering his eyelashes at them as well. But going back to that summer of 21, in hindsight, maybe that was a position that should have been one of the two key priorities, rather than... I'd always say that they needed a centre-back, because that defence, although it wasn't a disaster the previous season, there were fundamental issues, and they did need an upgrade on on Lindelof and Maguire. Maguire's stock at the time was pretty high. Sancho was this player that United just couldn't quit, and it did seem inevitable that he was going to end up at United at some point or another. And in the end, they did negotiate the fee down and get him. But it's been he's had a dreadful 2 years, and it is easy to say it with hindsight. But another club, if they had greater backing, if they were very good in the sellers market, they probably would have made an allowance for a defensive midfielder as well, and Rice would have been the obvious option. But I remember writing as well, just a couple of months into that season, it might have been after the infamous Leicester defeat, which was pretty much the start. That was the beginning of the end for Solskjaer, and been told that Solskjaer did want a defensive midfielder in the summer, but Rice was just unattainable. You go back then, he had, 3 years minimum left in his contract. There's this extension as well. So he would have been, I mean, they're talking about £100 million for him now. It would have been that figure then as well. He just started in, I think, most of England's games at the Euros, if not all of them. So his stock was as high then as it is now. It's probably higher now because he's a better player, but it was extremely high back then. And United just could not, they couldn't bankroll that kind of deal. But under different ownership and different circumstances, maybe they would have. There was an inquiry last year, but I think they were just wasting. That was a waste of time, really. West Ham had a good season. They had European football. United could not sign players of that profile. If they're going for elite England internationals this summer because they're back in the Champions League and they are back on the up. Last year they couldn't do that. They'd had their worst season in a generation. They didn't have Champions League football to offer. So of all the clubs to go to, why would Declan Rice go to United then? This summer, the way it's going, it's different. I can understand why United are backing Ten Hag with Mount, because there is arguably a greater need for a younger, more creative player in the mould of Mount, and someone who's more aligned with what Ten Hag wants. He wants an alternative to Christian Eriksen. He doesn't have an alternative to Eriksen. If Eriksen comes out the team, Fred goes in, and Fred is a very, very different player, and he might be off to Fulham still. So they need a midfielder. There is an argument that they need another midfielder as well, because Casemiro is going to miss games next season. He missed a lot of games last season through suspension. They need a young specialist defensive midfielder as well. But the prospect of them signing two this summer is pretty fanciful, unless there are some serious outgoings there, and it's not going to suffice with Zidane Iqbal, who is a midfielder, leaving for about €1 million.
Yeah, we'll come on to him in the second part. Actually, thought it was worth talking about. I've got a West Ham supporting friend who told everyone who would listen that Rice would go on to make 100 appearances for England when he was just coming through. I think when he was 19, and we just, told him to shut up and that he was stupid. But we're the ones looking a bit foolish now, and he's laughing. What a prediction, and what a player Declan Rice is anyways, and he'll be a great addition for anyone who does sign him. United fans will be hoping definitely that he won't be playing over at the Etihad next season anyways. Samuel, we'll leave it there for part one. Be back in a moment for part two. Obviously, it'll have consequences, the goalkeeping situation, Samuel, without doing Groundhog Day again on David De Gea. But I just thought it was, exactly. I just thought it was worth talking about. Is that now going to be a priority? Because Mount's coming in. We do expect him probably now to be the first signing of the summer, really, barring a disaster in negotiations and it collapsing. But Ten Hag's been described as obsessed with signing Harry Kane. We all know the team desperately needs a prolific goal scorer. Yeah, this goalkeeping situation is developing. David De Gea's contract expires next week. Next week, Samuel. Do you know what I mean? That's come around very quickly, hasn't it? And they can't go into pre-season without a number one, because that would just be amateur. So do they really turn their attention to a goalkeeper, I guess? Because all last 6 months, leading up to the summer window, it's all been about signing a centre forward. But I guess their focus is going to have to turn to a goalkeeper at some point if De Gea does leave.
Well, it will have to, and it's such a strange situation in that they could be completely without an obvious number one, or they could have, they could be sport for choice if, first day of pre-season and you've got De Gea turning up and Dean Henderson is being dragged kicking and screaming into Carrington because he has to go back to United and he's still number two to David De Gea 4 or 5 years on from first establishing himself at that level. But the question, really, that question is probably better answering next week when the time has passed for De Gea's contract. I've just got a horrible feeling, and I say this from a news perspective, that the deadline will come into July. He'll be out of contract, and there'll be some indication that we're still in discussions. When really, if there's no movement over the next week, and if you're an advisor to United, you'd just be saying, look, ignore the phone, don't speak to him, other than to say, we've made a decision that we're going to cease negotiations. We want to thank you for everything you've done, and this is the send off, etc. But I just advise not to negotiate anymore. And of course, then they've no choice but to sign a goalkeeper, because all the indications point to Henderson not being that goalkeeper. But a striker, the way they're operating in terms of carefully bidding for Mount with a striker in mind, because they don't want to compromise that budget. The two big signings they intend to make are a midfielder and a striker. That's not really changed. But the goalkeeping situation is a huge one. What I'd always argue with a striker is that when a striker gets the Golden Boot award, although he's received passes or crosses, he's primarily done the difficult task of sticking the ball in the back of the net. With the Golden Glove award, which is one of those awards that you kind of wish the Premier League didn't bother with, it's an individual award, but it's a collective effort. Luke Shaw, Lisandro Martinez, Rafael Varane had really good seasons for United and played a big role in the amount of clean sheets United amassed. De Gea did as well. He had some match-winning performances. I can think of West Ham, Leicester, Fulham in the FA Cup quarter-final as well. There were a few times last season you came away from the game thinking that De Gea's bailed out United there. The trouble was, as many times, if not more, there were times where he'd cost them. And being a goalkeeper is an unforgiving business, and De Gea's been a top goalkeeper. That's why he's been at United partly as long as he has. But I'd still always say that with the striker, if they don't sign a striker next season, they might as well plan for Thursday nights the following season, because I struggle to see where other teams are improving so much. If United end the window with Anthony Martial as their number 9, I just don't really see a way that they finish in the top 4, and I certainly don't see them getting into the Champions League through winning it either. That having a striker in that team could be the difference between them having an unsuccessful season and a successful season. With a goalkeeper situation, they have at least got players literally in front of the goalkeeper to protect him, but they are going to have to be very diligent in the way they go about signing a keeper, and they should be signing a goalkeeper as well.
Yeah. But I mean, Rashford was responsible for 27% of the goals this season from the whole collective total. And you think if he has a drop off in form, or if he picks up an injury like he did toward the end, they could be in trouble. So they definitely do need a prolific scorer. We've known that for a while. It's obvious. So let's hope they get one over the line. Other transfer news then, Samuel. Zidane Iqbal, as you just mentioned, obviously he's leaving the club, joining Utrecht in the Dutch first tier. Now, I thought it was a bit of a surprising move when that obviously broke earlier in the week. I mean, it kind of came out of nowhere. We knew Iqbal wanted to leave in January and he pushed for a move, was obviously denied a loan move, and then I expected him to leave again on loan this summer, so sorry, for the first time really, get some experience, come back and kind of try fight for his place. But he's leaving now on a permanent deal, and I think supporters were very surprised at the fee, which was just €1 million, which equates to around £850,000 in British sterling. I guess the point I would make, Samuel, I kind of feel like Iqbal was stuck in the middle whenever I've watched him for the under-21s this season, which is quite a lot, to be fair. He really stood out at that level. He looked quite a classy operator. His passing was brilliant. But the problem is he just wasn't first team level for Manchester United yet, and I guess that's what it boils down to. So were you surprised at the move or the fee, or what was your verdict really on the deal?
No to both. He switched to the SEG agency a couple of months ago, I think it was.
It was in April,
and they're rooted in the guy who runs them, Kees Vos, is Ten Hag's agent. He's Robin van Persie's agent. Kelsepri's Zidane Iqbal is about to move to the Netherlands. And as for the fee, we've said this time and again, United are not good sellers. Another club, if they had a player who was that talked about on Twitter, shall we say, they'd have got a higher fee for him. And with Iqbal, I suppose he was the fee was as low as it was because he didn't get a kick last season. He spent all of last season kicking his heels. Those were the only kicks that he was getting, and he should have been loaned out. But there were a number of times where, if there was an injury to a midfielder, he would be on the bench. But he was only getting into squads towards the end of the season because Kobbie Mainoo got injured. Mainoo had pretty much overtaken him. So he started the season, certainly after Casemiro arrived, Iqbal would have been fifth choice midfielder. And then towards the end of the season, before Mainoo got injured, he was probably sixth choice midfielder. And of course, Fernandes was dropping there as well. So you could say he was probably seventh in the pecking order. And given his age, is he 19 or 20? He wanted to go out and play in January. He wanted to go out on loan. It didn't happen. There's bound to be an element of impatience there, but he is a trailblazer given his background and how rare it is for people from his culture, South Asian footballers. It's a rarity, unfortunately. So it's great for United that they've had this lad come in, and he's been a credit to them. He's been a credit to his family. He looked good on pre-season as well last year, so it was extremely disappointing for him. It was disappointing for us in the press box. If there's a rookie who's getting a look in, it's something to talk about, to write about. But he didn't get those opportunities. The only opportunity he got was when Ralf Rangnick was the interim manager, and that was a cameo against Young Boys. But it said a lot about him and Charlie Savage, who made his debut simultaneously, that they waited around at Old Trafford after Rangnick had finished his media duties to say thank you to him for giving them that opportunity, for giving them the privilege of debuting for Manchester United. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets on in the Netherlands, whether he whether his profile expands, if he outgrows the Eredivisie. It's a very technical based league, as you'd expect. It's the Netherlands, of course, and it's pretty sedate compared to other leagues. So I don't think he should have any issue doing well there, but it remains to be seen how well he will do. And as I said, it'll be interesting to see where his career takes him from there.
Yeah, I think he'd be quite effective in that division, to be fair. I mean, he dropped him back as kind of a deep number 6, dictating play, spreading the ball. There was a game I went to in December in the Papa John's Trophy against Bolton. I was freezing that night. My fingers were falling off. But Iqbal made it worth it, to be fair. He really stood out. And that was against... Bolton had a really good team out. And they're at the top of League One, some obviously senior players. They won quite comfortably in the end, but it was a good performance from the 21s, and Iqbal emerged for a lot of credit. I spoke to Travis Binion, the academy coach, after the game, and he was giving them praise, seeing how much he'd improved. But I think you've hit the nail on the head, Samuel, with Kobbie Mainoo coming through. He's now 18 years old, just celebrated his birthday recently. And when Iqbal's been watching him from the bench, he played against Charlton in the Carabao Cup, against Leicester in the Premier League a few weeks later. When someone 2 years younger than you is coming through and getting more game time, that's going to be a bit frustrating. And I think that might have been what made him consider his future anyways. There's been some interest elsewhere, Samuel, in some other youngsters. Obviously Hannibal from Dortmund, interested in him. He's just had a fantastic loan with Birmingham. I guess the reality is when you see these players coming through, United's got a fantastic academy. They put a lot of hard work into developing these kids, but the reality is some of them will be needing moved on, and the majority will not make that first team because it's just so hard, isn't it, to kind of get into that team like Rashford and McTominay and really establish yourself.
Yeah, and they really should also see the academy as more of a cash cow than they do, because the cachet have come through the United academy, been developed there, potentially playing for the first team to a certain extent. winning a youth cup possibly, or going deep into a youth cup competition, that should be adding valuation to a youngster's the possible fee for a youngster. With Mejbri, they paid 10 million euros to Monaco to sign him in 2019. So I think his resale value is always going to be protected partly by that, and he has had a big profile pretty much since that deal, even before that deal when it was in the works. He's pretty unmistakable. He's got a very intense style. He's, as you said, he's had a season on loan in the Championship, which is good preparation ahead of stepping up to a top tier league, if not necessarily the Premier League, then the Bundesliga. If he does end up at Dortmund, I could see him slotting in a Bundesliga team. I think Dortmund would be quite the complement to him. He's also been he's a Tunisia international as well. That's been the case for 2 years. I think it was 2 years ago that he made his debut.
Played at one point. I think it was last.
He's been to a World Cup.
Sorry, Sam. It was last season. He played football. I think by the end of December, because he went to the Arab World Cup. He'd actually played more minutes for Tunisia than he had for United at that point, for the under-21s, obviously, which was an interesting quirk, I guess.
Yeah, and he had plenty of playing time for Birmingham last season. I think with Birmingham, there always seems to be an element of some kind of disarray there. I mean, the ownership, it seems to have been problematic for quite some time. They're not the team they were. I remember growing up in the 90s where they were always pushing for promotion. They eventually got that in 2002, and then they were a bit of a yo-yo club. And so it's not... They're not a go-to club necessarily where you're thinking, well, they're going to be pushing for promotion. But United have clearly formed a decent alliance with them because you go back 10 years ago, Jesse Lingard scored 4 goals on his debut on loan at Birmingham. Tyler Blackett was loaned there. Tom Thorpe was loaned there. In recent years, it's been Tahith Chong, Ten Mengi, and of course, Mejbri last year. So United clearly have a good relationship with them, and it wouldn't be a surprise if another academy player is loaned to Birmingham this summer. Chong, of course, went there permanently last year. But with Mejbri, although you could see him having a role in the United squad, you don't see it as an essential squad role or him being part of the core squad. When you're talking about the core squad, you are talking about a player who would be in the first 11 or the second 11. I mean, sometimes it's by default. Donny van der Beek by default is in there because he's the number 10 behind Bruno Fernandes. I know it's easy to forget him, but there's no real alternative. You'd argue Jadon Sancho is in there by default because the 2 left wingers are Rashford and Garnacho, 2 right wingers, Anthony and Ahmad. There's 1 striker in Marshall, so maybe Sancho's backup role is there. I know it doesn't work out quite as straightforward as that, but he is among those 22 or 23 core players. If there was an international tournament or there was a club tournament where you had to select 23 players, Sancho would be one of them. You couldn't say that about Mejbri or Anthony Elanga or these other fringe players. And Mejbri does give me the impression that he's a strong-willed enough lad that if he sees that there's not a pathway to the first team and there's a good offer that comes in, he'll think, do you know what, I'll take that, I'll go. He moved from France to England at a very young age. He switched allegiance from France to Tunisia at international level as well. I don't think that would particularly faze him. And when he scored a good goal for Birmingham last season, he was asked about, what had Ten Hag messaged him, had he seen it? And he said, I'm sure he's got Sky. It was almost giving his manager short shrift, it felt like. And Rich Fay did the story about Dortmund's interest earlier in the week, and I think Rich also wrote that when Mejbri joined Birmingham on loan last season, United wanted to extend his contract, and he didn't agree to that. Normally, that's part of if a player goes out on loan. It happened with James Garner when he was on loan to Nottingham Forest. Part of the agreement is that to obviously protect the asset, there's a year added onto their contract. I think it happened with Tuanzebe as well when he went to Aston Villa on loan again a couple of years ago. But Mejbri didn't want that, and given that happened, and that was before he had a kick for Birmingham, it seems unlikely that he'll have a key role to play at United in the near future.
be interested to see what happens with Alvaro Fernandez as well. He's obviously been at loan at Preston this season, equally impressive. So he'll get a chance in pre-season to see what he can do and maybe put some pressure on Tyrone Malacia. Anyways, obviously Luke Shaw is the established player at left back at the moment. Going back to Teef Chong, Samuel, did I tell you he was in my gym the other week? It was during Ramadan and I was leaving the gym and I looked up and someone shouted, "Chongy." And I looked up and you can't mistake his hair, can you? I was like, it's Teef Chong. But it's only a JD gym, nothing special before anyone gets carried away. I don't go at anything too posh anyways. We'll quickly wrap up then, Samuel. Can you expand on the line you did on potential refurbishment at Old Trafford coming up?
Oh, we've gone to interior decorating now.
We certainly have.
That's quite the that is
what does
quite
Dion Dublin say?
Quite the tangent.
Up the stairs, down the corridor, something like that on Homes Under the Hammer. Quick segue.
I can't say I've ever watched Homes Under the Hammer with Dion Dublin, but I do know elderly people who are fans of his presentation style. Maris Interiors have agreed a contract in principle to refurbish the workspaces at Old Trafford, but of course they are waiting for the Glazer family to make a decision on this strategic review, as they refer to it, which could result in the possible takeover of Manchester United. It can result in investment. We are still waiting for a decision on that. It's been 7 months. Everyone's becoming quite impatient or just bored to death of it. That's how I feel about it. And of course, Populous were the master planners who've overseen the building. They've overseen some very impressive stadium renovations and the building of certain stadiums as well. They are the go-to company for that, and that came. I think that was United announced that quite a while ago now, probably 18 months ago. It feels like, or the best part of 18 months. They're in the same position. They're in that holding pattern where they are just waiting for the go-ahead, and some people are extremely excited about getting involved with that. But of course, it depends on who's going to be calling the shots at Old Trafford, and if there is a new owner or new owners, what do they want to do? Do they want to refurbish it? Do they want to knock it down and build a new stadium? I did quite a detailed piece on that back in March, so if people want to read that, they still can, of course, and that does lay out the possibilities as to whether a new stadium is built on the same site or whether it's a case of enhancing Old Trafford. But either way, something needs to happen there. It's it's good that these plans are in place and these things are probably going to happen. And in a decade's time, if we're still going to Old Trafford, God knows what I'll be doing in a decade's time, but if we're still going to Old Trafford, be it as a spectator or in a journalistic capacity, hopefully, I'd imagine it will look quite different to what it looks like now. If it doesn't, then something will have gone badly wrong, and I'd probably presume that the Glazers are still the owners, which is a pretty terrifying thought.
Will you be 55 in a decade's time, Samuel? Is that how old you'll be?
I will not. No. I'll be 10 years short of 55. Yeah. If I said 20 years, fair enough. But yeah, I was waiting for a pop back. You've done me there. You'll be about
anyways,
20,
yeah, here we
29.
Go. Yeah, never.
It's like that. It's like that Office scene, isn't it? We're both in our 30s, and Tim says, "Well, I've just turned 30. You're 39." No, we're both in our 30s. That's the fact. Both in our 30s. Yeah. No, I know my limits.
I was going to say, forget an Old Trafford redevelopment, forget signing a world-class striker. If a new owner comes in, sort the bloody beer out on the concourses. It's Carling. Manchester United fans are better than drinking Carling on match days. Although I will say it is reasonable.
Which brewer is paying you to plug their brand here?
I'm yet to get a deal, Samuel, so I'm waiting for that. You see, I'm hoping one's going to listen to this podcast, and when I'm back from holiday, I'll give.
It's certainly not Carling, anyway.
No, yeah, exactly. Like I say, Samuel, I'm off for 2 weeks, so enjoy yourself. Hopefully, when I'm back, the club will be sold. There'll be a new replacement for David De Gea. Yeah, Harry Kane would have signed, so I'm going to enjoy myself on the beach, and hopefully, you're kept very busy when I'm away. But thanks for your time as usual.
Thank you, Stephen. Enjoy your holiday.
I will. Thank you very much. And thanks, listeners, as usual. Just a quick message. If TikTok is your cup of tea, personally, it isn't for me. I've actually not got it downloaded. Samuel, do you have TikTok downloaded?
No, I don't think
Didn't
I ever
think so.
will either.
I didn't think so, no. I just
I
wanted to
hope I'll
double check.
never have to.
Yeah. I mean, if TikTok is your cup of tea, though, head across there. We're on that app now. The MEN are branching out, you see. And obviously, check out the YouTube channel as usual. Ticking across nicely. The subscribers around 2,000 now. And obviously, we're on all good audio platforms, Spotify, Apple, etc. So have a great weekend. Take care. Thanks for listening as usual.